Pricey Jamaican vacation, first reported by the CBC, comes as the government is staring down the barrel of a tight deadline. 155,000 public servants could be on strike tomorrow if they don't reach a deal with the feds by 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. That's just 4 hours away. A strike could disrupt critical government services, including the Canada Revenue Agency, passports, and the border. With the deadline so close, those services so key, and no sign of a deal yet, the government is already fielding questions about whether it's prepared to use back-to-work legislation. And that's where we're going to start things tonight. NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh is with us live. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to start off on that looming deadline. You want the government to ensure there is not a strike. How do you propose they go about doing that?
Have a fair contract that respects that these are the workers that provided much needed relief during the pandemic for millions of Canadians. They deserve a fair contract negotiated in good faith that recognizes the increased cost of living.
Is it your view, Mr. Singh, that the offer put forward by the government over the weekend that is in line with what the mediator proposed as well, 9% over 3 years, is not fair?
I think that so far there looks like there is a fair negotiation going on, but right now we've got a looming deadline and the government has the ability to reach an agreement here, and I'm going to encourage them to do exactly that, work as hard as possible to satisfy the concerns and deliver a fair contract.
But it is your view that the contract that they're proposing, that 9% wage increase versus the 13.5 that the union had asked for, it's your view that that is fair?
No, what I'm saying is that from what I've heard so far, there seems to be, the negotiation seems to be proceeding. There seems to be back and forth going on. But I leave it to the parties to determine what is fair. But I'm just encouraging the government to ensure that they continue to do that and they reach an agreement by the deadline.
So if they don't reach an agreement, you know and Canadians know that the union has said that they will be on strike as of tomorrow. We are talking about, as I outlined in the introduction there, some pretty significant services for Canadians, right? And we've had our bouts in the last year of struggling with those services. I'm thinking of passports specifically, but a whole host of things. We're talking about processing immigration applications. You know, we're talking about what happens at the border. You have come out already saying that you're against back-to-work legislation. Given the significance of those services, are you confident in that position?
Yes, I mean, we've long said as a party that defends workers that forcing people back to work is not the way to reach good agreements and have good relationships with workers. You need to negotiate fairly. We believe in that. That's no surprise. But we don't need to get there. And I really want to emphasize this point. The government has the ability to avoid all of that with the next couple of hours to deliver a fair contract that is satisfactory to the workers, and then we will avoid all of this. So the ball is in the government's court.
I get that, and I certainly do understand the ask from the public service, but it's also kind of in the union's court, right? And I think we'd be having maybe a different discussion if the offer from the government was so far off what the union had originally asked for. But the government is also staring down a sizable deficit of $40 billion, and it has some of its own fiscal constraints, right? So I'm just trying to be clear here. Do you think the government should go further than what they've already put on the table? Why is all of the onus on the government here?
Well, the government has to reach a fair agreement. And this is not a surprise. This is something that's been known for months and months now, and longer than that, almost a year. And so the government has a responsibility to make sure they do everything possible to reach a good agreement. They've got to continue to negotiate fairly, and I expect the government to do what's necessary to avoid any strike and to make sure that these workers are respected.
I guess I'm just still not clear on what you want them to do differently. Do you just want them to acquiesce to whatever the union is asking for?
I want a fair contract for workers, acknowledging the difficult time that Canadians went through and how these workers were there for us. These are the workers that delivered programs like CERB, and I expect that these workers are now respected and deserve to get a fair contract. We're hours away from that resolution. I'm hoping that the government understands how important this is, that these workers get a fair contract.
You are in a confidence and supply agreement with the government. I know you have regular conversations with the Prime Minister. Is this an issue that has been part of those conversations? And have you personally expressed your opposition to back-to-work legislation to him? Have you received any assurances, really, that they won't go that route?
I made it really clear when we first negotiated the agreement that there would be no context in which New Democrats would ever support a back-to-work legislation. So I made that really clear. I took that off the table, that that's not going to happen. They should not count on us for that. And so the Prime Minister is well aware that that's not something we would ever support.
Mr. Singh, on the subject of inflation, we were talking about the news today from Statistics Canada. Things are a bit better. They're, of course, not great, but they are certainly going in the right direction. You're proposing legislation today that would effectively levy a tax on a company based on the size of the difference between what the CEO earns and what the company's workers earn. What guarantee do you have that that additional tax wouldn't be transferred to consumers?
Well, right now, the high salaries of CEOs are being transferred onto workers, are being transferred onto employees. We know that the wealthiest CEOs in our country are making record profits for their companies, and Canadians are paying the price. We're seeing a significant contribution of the cost of living coming from corporate greed. So we can't just throw our hands up and say we can't do anything. In the past 25 years, the gap between workers and the CEO used to be 100 times more, that a CEO would get 100 times more than the average worker. Now that it's grown to over 240 times more than the average worker, more than doubled in the past 25 years. That is outrageous. Canadians are upset at it. This is an idea that we were inspired by Bernie Sanders in the States, where there is an incentive. If a company increases the wages of workers, they won't have to contribute more. But if they can afford to pay 431 times more than the average worker, like in the case of Loblaws paying the executive Galen Weston, then they should contribute more fairly to society. If they don't want to pay higher taxes, they can increase the wages of workers. For too long, workers have suffered. Workers have been the ones saying we're paying the price, and CEOs have been making more money than they've ever made before.
I understand completely the premise of what you're saying, and I think that the frustration that you're expressing is echoing that of a number of Canadians. And by questioning your approach to it, I'm not trying to insinuate that we should throw our hands up in the air, but I think that it's fair to question how effective what you're proposing would actually be in addressing the problem that you're accurately laying out. And to that point, again, look, if you add taxes based on this formula, and I think you're modeling it over something that started in the U.S. but never actually went, a proposal that started legislatively but never actually went anywhere. If you levy that tax, how do you prevent the company from on-passing those extra costs to consumers? So, for example, the grocery store example that you put out there, what's to stop that grocery store from saying, well, we got to pay more taxes, so we got to increase the price of food, really?
Well, we've looked at other ways that we can tackle the price of food. We said that we need to have better competition laws. We need to protect consumers with better consumer protection. We need better laws to protect producers as well. So there's a number of ways we can tackle that. But the gap between what a worker gets paid and what a CEO gets paid is a specific concern, and it has grown massively over the past 25 years. And right now we've got this colossal example of Galen Weston, the CEO of Loblaws, earning 431 times more the salary of the median income of a worker at his very own company. That is wrong. And so we're saying, well, let's incentivize these corporations to actually increase the wages of workers. If you can reduce that gap between the CEO salary and the worker salary, then they won't have to pay tax. But if they have a massive gap, then they've got to contribute more fairly. If you can afford to do that, you can afford to contribute more. And when it comes to how we bring down the prices of things like food or things like cell phone services, which again are massively expensive in our country compared to everywhere else, then there's ways that we can do that. With cell phone, we can regulate some of those prices with the federal laws that we have. We can bring in more competition. We can require services to be provided like a truly unlimited data. But there's ways that we can give people a break, at the same time ensuring that workers are not seeing that their wages are effectively going down because of inflation, where at the same time the CEO's wages are actually going up massively. That's wrong.
Okay, I'm running out of time. I just wanted to quickly ask you about the issue of the vacation and sort of the back and forth that took place today. Your colleague, Matthew Green, kind of, positioned it against the backdrop of the struggles that Canadians are facing in question period today. Is it your view that, do you have a similar view? Was this trip wrong to take, or is the Prime Minister entitled to take a vacation?
Oh, there's no question the Prime Minister can take a vacation. What I look at this and say is that this answers the question that I've had and that many Canadians have had. Why is it that a prime minister who has so much power to solve things like the housing crisis, to tackle the cost of living crisis, and to fight back against for-profit healthcare, why isn't he doing those things? Well, this vacation is an example of the lifestyle, of the life that the prime minister lives, which does not give him a real experience with the struggles that Canadians are facing. He's never had to worry about the cost of housing. He's never had to worry about whether a family member could get access to publicly funded care or could afford the private care that they had to resort to. He's never had to have those decisions or those choices. And this vacation and that lifestyle is just more evidence of a world the prime minister lives in that keeps him disconnected from what actual Canadians are going through. And that shows why he's not responding to the problems with the urgency that he should be.
Just really quickly, though, the costs of the vacation, the government says, are mostly attributed to security. Like, what is it that makes you think out of this that he is, you know, not in, I guess, out of touch, as you and other opposition leaders have said? Like, if most of the costs are due to security, then wouldn't it be the same if he went somewhere else?
Well, I'm not worried about the security. If the security is reasonable for a prime minister to have. I'm thinking about going to a resort where there's questions of whether he paid for it or not. $9,000 a night is one quote of the potential cost of this resort. And the type of lifestyle and the type of friends that the prime minister have, I'm not begrudging a vacation. I'm just saying it shows the insight into a lifestyle of wealth that does not allow someone to understand the real struggles that people are going through. And then we're seeing it in action. I'm really focused on the fact of there's not enough action being taken to make housing more affordable. There's no real fight to push back against premiers that are bringing in more and more for-profit care. Understanding those struggles would mean that someone would say, hey, I know what it's like, or I know people in my life that have struggled with getting access to care that they can't afford, and we need to fight back to have more public universal care. That's something that someone who has experienced it would want to fight for. Someone who's maybe lost a home, maybe not been able to find a place to call home, would understand how important it is to fight back. And I think that this just shows that the prime minister is in a different world that doesn't allow him to understand what people are dealing with.
Okay.